producer Tom Werman. Have you seen The Dirt yet?
Oh, yeah, I saw it.
Thoughts on the accuracy or opinions?
Oh, yeah. I think it was pretty accurate, more accurate than the Heroin Diaries, that's for damn sure. I was grateful that I wasn't in it, and, because I wouldn't imagine that would have been very accurate. Bands have a way of loving you when you're selling millions of records with them, and then blaming you for everything that didn't happen 20 years later. And so producers, you don't hear many bands or see or read many bands saying, boy, we sure loved that guy, and he made a great record with us. They just don't do that. I'm not sure why. Maybe it has to do with credit. But I was very happy not to have been in it. Same thing happened to Roy Thomas Baker in Bohemian Rhapsody. He was mentioned in one line, and he had a tremendous amount to do with Queen's records, compositions, arranging, production. They just don't. They don't seem to want to credit anyone else with achieving anything or helping to achieve anything great. I loved, aside from the challenges that drug use presented, I really enjoyed working with the Crue. It was a new experience. And an exciting experience for a sheltered, Ivy League preppy. I was kind of like a trained SEAL when I got to LA, and I sort of lived my teenage years after I was 33 or so.
Doug Morris was the one that connected you to Motley Crue as he.
No, he wasn't.
Oh, he wasn't.
He connected me to Twisted Sister.
Okay.
Who also talked, not they, but Dee Snider, talks incredible shit. He was without question the worst person I ever worked with. And I didn't realize it until after the album was over. I mean, he was there for the mixes, and he approved all the mixes. And then as soon as the album was over, he wouldn't talk to me. And in his book, he said, I believe that Tom Werman destroyed our album, ruined our album, which happened to sell 7 million copies,
Right. They totally tanked the next record after even selling all those. I don't even think that next one went platinum.
That's right. Anyway, that's just the way some of them are. I'm not an angel. I'm probably not the easiest guy in the world, but I was far from a dictator, and I think I did a pretty good job at getting these guys on the radio.
No, did an excellent job. I loved those records as a kid, including Stay Hungry. I couldn't stand the next anything Twisted Sister released after that. I just despised. But I interviewed one of the guitar players probably 10 years ago, and I can't remember asking him, but I found it so strange with Twisted Sister. You would think the people who actually play the instruments, at the time I didn't even realize that Dee Snider was the only songwriter. So I found it so weird that when you look at the song credits that you're like, I mean, didn't one of those guys, didn't a guitar player or a bass player or somebody come in with an idea, or was it just Dee Snider was the only one allowed to write?
Well, I don't know, but he was clearly the leader of the band. This is not an untalented guy. I mean, aside from the fact that he was extremely two-faced, he's bright. He's smart. He's sharp. He's creative. So everything about him is I admired, except for his total lack of integrity. That wasn't so great. But he was the guy. I mean, every band has its leader, even if they say they're a democracy. in Poison, it wasn't so obvious. Brett and Bobby were kind of co-leaders, but Ted was a dictator. Ted Nugent, not a dictator, but he knew every note of every instrument, and he told everybody what to play. And he knew it before he walked in the studio. It was amazing. Nikki Sixx, definitely the spark plug in Motley Crue. Rick Nielsen, definitely the spark plug in Cheap Trick. There's always one. He was that guy. He kind of created that band, along with John French, JJ French. I haven't spoken to any of those guys in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I mean, you would think a guitar player would be like, "Hey, here, check out this riff." I just when you're
sometimes,
like,
yeah.
and I always thought Nikki Sixx was that was his gift, and of course he was the main songwriter and wrote some of their biggest hits solely. But he always seemed to kind of encourage the other guys to participate in the writing.
Well, they did. I mean, Tommy was the second, I think, most creative person in that band, and of course Mick was the third. Vince, he did what he had to do. He didn't do as much creating as the other guys.
Right.
But Nicky was the brains behind the outfit.
Of course. Which I don't think Tommy Lee really had any songwriting credits on "Shout at the Devil," or I'm not even sure "Too Fast for Love."
I don't remember that, but his contribution to the band was,
of course,
really,
one of my favorite rock drummers of all time. Tommy Lee is amazing.
He really is. Yeah, he's very, very good. He's right up there with Bunny Carlos, who I think is the best drummer I ever worked with. Tommy's right there too. I mean, he's good. They both loved what they do and did it naturally,
And so, how does your association begin with Motley Crue then, if it doesn't come from Doug Morris?
I had a friend who worked with me at Epic Records who sent me "Too Fast for Love," and I listened to it. She said she was in New York and I was in LA, and she said, "You should check this band out. They sound like somebody you would be good at, producing." And I listened to it and I told her, it's really not my cup of tea. It's a little too sloppy. So I was pretty neat as a producer. I like things to be in time and in tune. And, anyway, I didn't go for it. And then I became head of A&R at Elektra Records, which was their label. They were signed to it, and Too Fast for Love had done pretty well. And there was a guy who worked for me, Tom Zutot, who was in the movie. He was played in the movie. He had signed the crew to Elektra, and he said, "Werman, you should produce this band. It would be a really good match." So the band came in to my office, and we had a meeting, and Nicky was really difficult. Tommy kind of brought him around, and I think we probably went into rehearsal, and they said, "Fine, you can produce our record." They didn't like the guy who produced their first record. I think it was their manager. I can't remember who produced their first record, actually.
Yeah, I think they brought Roy Thomas Baker in at the end or something to either fix what the original, they had released it independently. But yeah, I think it was maybe the manager. But I know they brought Roy Thomas Baker in to, what did he remix it or something? I can't quite remember.
Possibly. With Michael Wagner. That was his engineer. So, it just happened from there. It was quick. Would have been a little quicker if Nicky hadn't had a car accident, broken his shoulder, and he had to do his bass parts with a broken shoulder.
Right.
I mean, his arm was literally in a sling. He was playing the bass. It was fairly heroic. Took a long time though. So, because bands have all their material material made and rehearsed and written and ready to go. First albums usually go pretty quickly. Then the band goes out on tour and the album explodes and the label says, oh man, get back in the studio, and make a second album quick while the iron is hot. And then we're putting you out on this big tour to support the album. So all of a sudden there's a time crush, and they got to come up with 12 more great songs. And that's why some follow-up albums are disappointing. But they had all the songs ready for the first album, and it was pretty cool. We did have an engineer who was divisive and disruptive and
Jeff Workman.
Good. Yeah, Workman was an evil guy. He used to run his producers down and try to get the band's confidence. And he'd say, "This guy doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what he's doing. I'm doing everything." And it was pretty sick. I
recently, just about a month ago, was watching a documentary by a group called Drivin' and Cryin'. They had a hit in the in the 90s. They had like one hit, and anyways, it was kind of their whole story. And they were like back in the studio, and Jeff Workman was the engineer, and he was like a complete drunk, I think, at that time.
Right, he was very heavy drinker. Yeah, he was just a bad guy. He left town owing me $5,000, and he was very good. He did a great job. The album has balls. The albums, I like the sound of Girls, 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 of that album, because Mick finally got a good guitar sound. The fans seem to prefer Shout because it's got a bigger bottom, than
kind of a raw sound, considering the 80s, and especially what the 80s became. That's my favorite personally out of the Motley Crue catalog. I like the other albums as well, but that was the one that really kind of just hit me in the face.
Yeah,
but,
I think, from my perspective, the cut Girls, Girls, Girls and the cut Wild Side are the two best produced songs I ever did with Motley Crue. Other people would disagree. I love Wild Side.
No, I agree. Yeah. Was Mick using BC Rich guitars on that record, or was he using his Gibson on Shout at the Devil?
I could not possibly remember. He used a bunch. He would use different guitars, I think, for different songs. Not every song, but I don't know. He had two. He had a different guitar tech for Girls, and I think that made a big difference in the sound.
Right.
But I think Mick is a pretty heavily underrated guitarist. He had great licks. Great, the way Keith Richards makes up the best guitar riffs in the history of rock and roll. Mick made up some really good licks, played them really well.
Yeah.
And I just think he was very good, very understated guy. Didn't stand out, didn't want to stand out. He was a great guy. I had the best relationship with Mick. We just got along, and he presented no problems at all. He was great. We worked together. He'd do his basic track, and then I would work with him in the control room on fills, and I'd kind of sing to him, and he'd try something, and we'd tailor it, and then we'd do fills. I'm big on guitar fills, between words, between verses and choruses, turnarounds. So he was extremely cooperative and creative.
You recorded Shout at the Devil at Cherokee Studios?
Yep.
And how long did that album take to record?
Not that long. I don't recall that it was a long album at all. Probably 6 weeks, I'm thinking. Most albums that I did at that time took 8 weeks, around 8 weeks. But it was pretty good.
And were you there for the demos?
No. They gave me the demos. Almost all bands gave me demos. I listened to them at length and made notes about changes, and then we'd go into a rehearsal studio with a boombox, and we would make changes in the arrangements and then record them. So we would then go into the real studio and refer to the demo recordings, to the rehearsal recordings. But there was the demo first, then the rehearsal demos, and then the real deal. So I would work with the band, the rhythm section mainly. So I, if I want to restructure the song, I would do that. I'd say, okay, we're going to use half the intro. We're going to do verse, chorus, then do the instrumental break, and then whatever. And we'll do a cold stop instead of a fade. And we wouldn't rehearse vocals. We wouldn't rehearse solos, anything lead. We would just do basic rhythm track, which would be drums, bass, rhythm, guitar. It just worked out that way, because if you rehearse too much, the song just gets stale.
Right.
So we did the basics, and we would refer to the boombox versions in the studio.
Listening to some of those demos that they included on a re-release of Shout at the Devil, you listen to like Looks That Kill, or you listen to Shout at the Devil, and I mean, it really just sounds like some local band. What is it? And I was really, I'm listening to it thinking, what is it that really separates it from the final version? But what is it that kind of makes the song, especially like a Looks That Kill, you think it's kind of a cheesy guitar riff, and when you play it, it almost sounds kind of goofy. However, on the album, it sounds really killer, on the album. But on the demo, I thought it kind of had a little bit of that goofiness again. But what is it overall that makes that song come together and really sound like a hit?
I can't put my finger on it. Demos sound like demos because they were made probably live, pretty much live, in a low grade studio or at home. I don't know where their demos were made, but all demos sound crappy. You just have to listen through the crap and say, we can do something. I can do something with this song. Here's an idea that I have. And then you get into a top drawer studio with a top drawer engineer and top drawer mics, and you paid attention to the song, you've rehearsed it, it's in its second version now after the original demo, you've refined it, and it's just a combination of all those good things that result in a much better version of the song.
Yeah. On that,
and also you don't have a producer guy in there saying, that's good, but if you did this, it might be better. Try that. You didn't have an objective person really in the control room judging which performance was
right.
the best one for that song.
Do you recall what the budget was for Shout at the Devil?
No, I don't, but it wasn't very much. When after I'd been at Elektra for about a month and a half or two, they kicked the president upstairs, and EMI kicked him upstairs and brought in a new guy from Warner Brothers, and he was really tough. He was an A&R guy at Warner Brothers, and he had signed some big acts over there, and he fancied himself up, a real hot shot. And he said, the first thing I'm going to do at this label is get rid of Motley Crue. They're an embarrassment. And I tried as diplomatically as I could to say, you know, Bob, someone has to pay the bills, and you know, your music is fine, and it's top drawer, and it's high grade, and you know, it's quality music, but this is rock and roll, and there's mass appeal here. I understand rock and roll. You don't. I didn't say that, but I wanted to say that. And fortunately, Too Fast for Love became a big seller before he could, or maybe it was Shout. I can't remember. No, it had to be Too Fast for Love. That became a big seller before he could drop the band, and he would have looked foolish if he had dropped the band. Right, it was Too Fast for Love because we hadn't finished Shout. I was gone from Elektra before I did Shout at the Devil. I did it. I didn't finish the Zutog part. One of the reasons I got to meet Motley Crue and Dokken in the beginning was when I couldn't work with this guy, the new president, so I quit. And they said, "Wait a minute, can we do a production deal with you? Would you produce some records for us under contract?" And I said, "Okay." You know, I was on my way to being an independent producer, and they wanted to give me, you know, a guaranteed amount for 3 albums that I would produce. And Motley was the first one. So that was how I kind of got to them.
Any kind of moment that stands out more from the other from those sessions, from Shout at the Devil? Like when you reflect on them nowadays, is there something that you kind of think of from time to time?
When I think about those sessions, I always think about Tommy, mainly Tommy, and his enthusiasm and his curiosity about the newest technology in drumming. He was really, really curious and adventurous in his approach to the drums, and he always wanted to use the latest technology, the latest. You know, he was into samples pretty early. You know, I remember that, and I remember being grateful to him for getting really good drum tracks right away. So we didn't have to do a lot of editing, and you know, you want a solid drum track to build on. So, and he did that, and I just enjoyed his whole vibe in the studio. He really, you know, drove the train when they went into play, and they would run through the song live. And I remember struggling with Vince, you know, because he would get in there and try his hardest, but you know, sometimes he just didn't produce too many keepers for that day because he had stayed up all night partying. That's simple.
What was your process for recording Vince's vocals? Did you have kind of a way you did it?
Yeah, I always did. I had a process for all vocalists to spare them as much as I could and minimize their time in front of the mic. You know, I'd make 3 columns. I'd write out each line, you know, on lined paper, and I'd make 3 columns next to the lyrics. And we'd make 3 tracks. So we'd do 3 separate tracks right away. And then I'd tell him to go take a break. And he'd leave the studio and, you know, go into the lounge or something. And we would go line by line, and I would circle which was the best line of each of the 3 tracks. And then we would make a composite. We would simply bounce all the various lines to one track. So then we'd have a pretty good vocal performance. And then I'd do 2 more tracks. And then we'd compare those 2 to the good vocal performance. And so the vocalist would have sung the song 5 times, and we'd have almost a perfect track. I'd underline or highlight parts that still needed to be worked on, and we would work only on those lines or words that needed to be improved. Most of the time with a normal vocalist, we could do a song in about an hour, lead vocal. But with Robin Zander, we did it in 10 minutes. He could do 2 or 3 songs in one afternoon. He was truly amazing. As a vocalist, Vince had a lot of character, but wasn't able to, to do that much work all at once. And he sometimes it just worked out that Nicky would have to sing to him what the melody was supposed to be, because he hadn't had enough time to learn the song.
What would you say, like how long maybe a typical song would take for him to kind of get a final vocal, or where it was all put together?
A few hours, maybe 2 hours one day, 2 hours the next day. And once he had been partying the night before. He came in, he took his place in front of the mic. We worked with him for several hours, and we kept one line.
Do you remember what song or what line that was, by any chance?
I do not, but that wasn't on Shout. The one-line day was on, I think, on Girls, Girls, Girls. I cannot remember what song it was. Uh-huh. But, then hopefully, he'd go home and not go out that night, and right. The next day he'd finish the job.
Yeah. When I was a kid and I'd gone to like Great White and Judas Priest was my first concert, and then I went to somebody else that, sounds just like the record. And then I went to Motley Crüe and Rat. As a kid, I didn't even understand. I was like, what the fuck? I didn't understand how they didn't sound anything like the record live.
Right, it's true. But then hopefully you got to an Eagles concert. They reproduced the album on stage. Perfect. They were unbelievable band. Really, people would say, "Well, what artist did you do? Anybody we've heard of?" Say, "Oh yeah," and I'd rattle them off, and they'd say, "Wow." They kind of automatically assume that it was easy doing those records of the kind of band they were, and because they don't sound that neat and clean, and I always, if they say that or say something like that, I say, listen, I hate to correct you, but if I could have produced the Eagles, I could have slept through the entire session, because they were so talented, so motivated, so focused on the music, and it's tough. It's tough to get other bands to concentrate. Sometimes, actually, I'm writing this book, and in the book, I admit that producers are supposed to help bands realize their musical vision. They're supposed to not, they're supposed to focus only on what the band wants and how to do it, how to realize that. But I didn't necessarily do that. I tried to make the songs good for me. Because I thought, wow, if I like them, then people will buy them. And I wound up, being pretty much right about that. But that's what I wanted. That's what I wound up doing.
I did read on one of your interviews where you said you used you weren't sure which one, but it was a Sennheiser mic on Vince's vocals. And
I got a special mic. I bought a $2,000 mic.
Yeah. Was that on Shout at the Devil?
No.
That was later?
I'm sure it was later, but it's because I had experience in the studio with Vince, and then mixed the record and EQ'd the record and worked with his vocal track. And I kind of concluded that Vince sang partially through his nose. He had a kind of a nasal sound and a pinched sound and not a full-throated sound. And I wanted a mic that would minimize that frequency. And I got it. It was a Sennheiser mic, and I figured the investment was worth it.
I'm not trying to be too techy. I'm definitely a tech guy, but I'm not trying to wear you out by that. But was it a thin mic? There's an MD441, but it's a kind of a long, skinny Sennheiser mic?
No.
Okay.
No, it was not. It was a nice roundish, not with a round, mouthpiece.
Right.
The end.
Like a round ball.
Kind of beveled. It was kind of beveled.
Okay.
I think. But I am the opposite of you. I am a technoramus.
Right. Yeah. That's why I didn't gear. I thought I'd just see if that was possibly that one.
I depended totally on my engineer for everything.
Right. Which that's what I wonder. I wonder if some of these guys, rather like maybe they have some of these resentments. Do you think that has to do with the fact that you weren't also an engineer?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think it has to do with the fact that after a certain point, I became established, and I started having gold records and platinum records, and if somebody worked with me, many would, not be happy with the fact that people might assume that because I was successful, I made a successful album with them, and that I was the reason or part of the reason that it sounded so good and sold so well. I think that was definitely the case with Dee Snider, because he had worked. He had created this band, and he had worked with the band for 7 or 8 years, and they worked really hard. They were pretty popular in Europe, but they, as Doug Morris said, and I quote, they couldn't get arrested here in the United States. And he made them work with me. He called me at home and he said, "You are the only producer who can make, who I think can make a hit record with this band." And so he was the head of Atlantic Records at the time, and you don't turn him down.
Well, of course.
So I said, "Okay, I'll do your band. I'll do the band." And I think that because I was forced on them, they resented it, obviously. I don't think they resented the millions and millions and millions of records they sold. That record's still a big money maker.
Oh, I know. Oh, yeah.
It does really well. Anyway.
Do you recall anything about how In the Beginning came together? The intro?
Oh, yeah. I think Nicky wrote it, and Jeff read it.
Right.
Jeff Werman, because he had that accent and he had that gravelly voice, and I think he may have edited it or co-written it, but that was his baby. That was a great thing that he did, I think, to set that song up.
And of course. But as far as the sounds and the music bed that's underneath it, do you remember anything about putting that together or how that came together?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Oh, that's fine.
If I listen to it, I might. If I listen to it right
and
now.
So that was an initial. Did Nicky have that idea, like coming into it, or was that kind of in the studio? He put that together.
I think he had that idea.
Okay.
He has ideas.
Yeah, on one of the on the Looks That Kill demo, there was on the chorus, there was like an extra. It was like she's got the looks that kill, that kill, that kill. It kind of repeated twice instead of the gap.
Yeah. Well, I think I think that may have been, and I can't remember. Remember, this is like what? 35 years ago. I think it may have been because I pretty much featured the James Bond melody. That song is the James Bond, the chorus is the James Bond theme. Da 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 it's right from the movies. It's like Goldfinger and so forth and so on. Somebody's here, and I don't know who it is. All right, never mind. The distractions of being an innkeeper. So, yeah. And I think, that vocal just went along with the guitar line.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was a producer call. It seems like it would almost be a producer call because it took one of the Looks That Kill. It took one of those out, so it kind of almost let the song breathe a little bit in the chorus.
Oh, I see. That may have been, but I didn't do much with lyrics with Motley. Not that much. A producer call for me would be a specific lick. Let's not use the hi-hat there. Let's use the ride cymbal. I don't like that snare head. Let's change that. The guitar's too tubby. Stuff like that. But not too much vocal arrangements.
There was also a Shout at the Devil in that demo. It's at the end, Vince can be heard saying, "I'm in hell. I need evil. I sold my soul."
I haven't heard those demos. I didn't get those albums. Yeah, I never. I don't have any of the albums with the bonus tracks on them. Just the originals. I guess I could try to find them on YouTube.
You can, yeah. That's where I found them. You can just type in like Shout at the Devil demo and Looks at Kill demo, and that's how I found it. And I hadn't heard them until I was putting this interview together. I just thought it was funny because I remember when they were kind of going around doing the promo for it, they would say, "Hey, we're saying shout with the or shout at the devil. We're not saying shout with the devil. We're not satanic and all that." But then they had that, of course, which didn't make the record, but obviously they were really trying to play on that little evil satanic thing at the time.
Oh yeah, we loved that. We loved it. I did a lot of backwards recording at that time because of the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Committee, and what's her name, Tipper Gore.
Sure.
And there were evangelists and just idiots in the South who wanted to ban rock and roll and had record burnings, and then Motley came along and it was like, oh God, they worshiped the beast. And, it was great just to string them along and to rile them up and to get them crazy.
All right.
So I would. There was one album I did sometime. I don't know if it was the Crue or not, where I had somebody recite the Lord's Prayer, and then I played it. I made it go backwards on the song, and it was in there. And of course, people turned it around, played it backwards, and realized that it was the Lord's Prayer. And they went nuts. God, these people, they're Satanists. So, really, these people are still around.
There was even a warning on Shout at the Devil that said there may be backwards.
Oh yeah, the PMRC made the record industry do that. It was like a movie rating, explicit lyrics. Can you imagine if they did that today with hip hop?
Oh my God. Well, they might still do the explicit thing. I'm not even sure, but were you the one who kind of chose the track listing for Shout at the Devil? Because I noticed there were probably 3 or 4 songs. There was one called I Will Survive and Black Widow, and there were some other songs that they demoed. And of course, I know Hotter Than Hell, which became Louder Than Hell later.
Louder Than Hell, right?
But were you exactly. But were you the one who chose the songs and said this is the track listing, or which songs were going to make the record?
No, we did that together. The producer doesn't have that authority. The producer's hired by the band. The band rarely says, "Oh, you don't like that song? Okay." And that's what Dee Snider accused me of doing. He said he didn't let us do this, and he didn't. Such a load. Producers can't do that unless you're, like George Martin and you're working with a brand new band. You're hired by the band. You collaborate. You say, well, I think this could be a hit single. And the only time when I have authority that the band doesn't really care about that much is in the sequence. What opens the record? Your strongest song always opens the record, and I would always put the second strongest song in the number 2 spot, and the third strongest song would open side 2. And then you'd put all the kind of not so great songs like number 3, 4, and 5 on side 2. That's it, because you'd like to leave them with a good song, the last one on side 2. But usually the worst song on the album came next to last on side 2. And that was kind of like a formula.
Yeah.
That I used on almost all the records I produced.
Were there any songs that were written that appeared on that album that were written in the studio, or were they all hammered out?
They were probably mostly hammered out, but there are always changes, and there are changes in the studio, little lyrical changes maybe, or you stumble on something and you say, well, let's do that. That sounds good. There's never a carbon copy done in the studio.
Now, Nikki Sixx said that the record company didn't promote Shout at the Devil at all. Is that true?
I don't remember. I was probably right on to another project. They probably were caught by surprise. They were not completely aware of the scene on the strip, of the popularity of the Crue at that time. And given the fact that the head of the company had no respect for the band,
it might have been true.
I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't want to spend a lot of money on it.
Right.
So
I'm sure that changed later, though.
But I was up in Northern California, and I got a phone call from Tom Zutaut, and who said, "Werman, we have a hit." And those are his exact words. And apparently the record just took off at one point. It kind of exploded, and there was huge demand for it once the word got out that it was good. Apparently, I mean, I had I had hopes for it, but I didn't think it was going to establish the band as a big deal.
Yeah, or launched a whole genre, Really, I mean, that album is the one that kind of, and honestly, I almost think that if people, there's still almost a kind of an embarrassment that's attached to maybe some of the 80s stuff. But I think if people were really honest, even thrash bands, I've talked to the guy in Metal Church, there's a guy in Exodus, some of these thrash bands that were influenced by like Livewire. And I just think Motley Crue probably, if people were very honest, I think Motley Crue is a bigger influence than what they really say. "10 Seconds to Love." Now, there was always a rumor Vince was like banging some chick in the studio while you guys recorded his vocals. Any truth to that?
Definitely not.